So what we have here is the initial depiction of Miss Havisham in Chapter 8 of Great Expectations when Pip is first asked to visit the Satis house. Miss Havisham is a really important character in the novel, and we want to pay very close attention to her characterization. Throughout the novel, we have discussed Dickensian characters and the importance of noticing and annotating for things like conventions of satire, hyperbole, litote, over and understatement, etc. We've also talked extensively about the importance of diction and imagery in characterization. Remember, diction is the author's choice of words. Authors meticulously choose words that they're going to use to depict certain characters, and it's really important that we observe the language. We also want to remember imagery. Imagery are the vivid pictures that pop up into our brain, created by the words and the language, and also the author's use of sensory details. What we're going to do is we're going to do a close read of this passage, the 2 paragraphs. And then we're going to watch 4 different film adaptations of Great Expectations, Chapter 8, when Pip first meets Miss Havisham at the Satis house. We're then going to write an argument paragraph as an assessment of your understanding of these concepts. Your task is going to be to argue which of the 4 film depictions of Miss Havisham most accurately captures the character as she's depicted by Dickens in the novel. I want you guys to pay attention to the diction and imagery, as those literary devices will help us brainstorm words that we would use to describe her, and we can apply those understandings to the film depictions in our arguments. Remember, you are going to have to use very specific text references and evidence from the text in your argument of which of the 4 Havishams most closely captures the character as she's depicted by Dickens. I'm going to model a close read, and let's go ahead and give this a shot. So here we go. This is from Chapter 8, Great Expectations. She was dressed in rich materials, satins and lace, and silks of white. Her shoes were white, and she had a long white veil dependent from her hair, and she had bridal flowers in her hair, but her hair was white. Right away in the first passage, the first part of the passage rather, we notice the repetition of the word white. And generally speaking, when we associate imagery with white, these are sort of bright, vivid characters. But something's amiss in the last clause of this sentence right here particularly, where it says, but her hair was white. This sets the scene as something being just a little bit off. She seems to be dressed for her wedding, but at the same time, as readers right away were given the depiction of an elderly lady sitting dressed in a wedding gown. So immediately something feels off. Let's continue. Some bright jewels sparkled on her neck and her hands, and some other jewels lay sparkling on the table. Dresses less splendid than the dress she wore, and half-packed trunks were scattered about. She had not quite finished dressing, for she had but one shoe on. The other was on a table near her hand. Her veil was but half arranged. Her watch and chain were put on, and some lace from her bosom lay with those trinkets, and with her handkerchief and gloves, and some flowers and a prayer book, all confusedly heaped about the looking-glass. Now right away, we know something is also amiss by the imagery right here. We get the image of a lady who has not finished dressing. And again, it says right here that her shoe was on the table near her hand. So again, right away, just in the depiction, the imagery that we get with Havisham, we're given the depiction of a character that seems to be not all there. Miss Havisham seems like she might be a couple sandwiches short of a picnic, but let's read on, and I want you guys to pay very close attention to this second paragraph right here. This is where the imagery is going to turn from sort of bright jewels, white veil, white dress, etc., and it's going to start to get a little bit dark. Let's take a look. It was not in the first moments that I saw all of these things, though I saw more of them in the first moments than might be supposed. But I saw everything within my view which ought to be white, had been white long ago, and had lost its luster, and was faded and yellow. So right here, the imagery, we go from white, right, to white that's lost its luster, and then we get the imagery of Miss Havisham as faded and yellow. So this becomes an important shift in really the depiction of the character from the initial impression into the second part of this paragraph. Let's continue. I saw that the bride within the bridal dress had withered like the dress, and like the flowers, and had no brightness left but the brightness of her sunken eyes. I saw that the dress had been put upon a rounded figure of a young woman, and that the figure upon which it now hung loose had shrunk to skin and bone. Right here, the imagery starts to get darker. When we start to think about skin and bone, immediately we start to think of a very, very emaciated person. And the imagery starts to go almost in the direction of death. And let's see how Dickens uses imagery in the rest of this passage to continue that transition. Here's where it gets really interesting. Once I had been taken to see some ghastly waxwork at the fair, representing I know not what impossible personage lying in state. Right here, with the choice of the words ghastly and waxwork, the diction becomes very, very eerie. Ghastly isn't a word that we have a lot of positive associations with. The connotative associations that we have with the word ghastly are not all that positive. We also start to get the waxwork at the fair, and what the reader gets is the image of the wax figures at wax museums. And if you've ever seen a wax figure at a wax museum, they're incredibly, incredibly creepy. Let's continue. I know not what impossible personage lying in state. Once I had been taken to one of our old marsh churches to see a skeleton in the ashes of a rich dress that had been dug out of a vault under the church pavement. Now waxwork and skeleton seemed to have dark eyes that moved and looked at me. So right here we start to get the imagery of death. And it starts with the word skeleton, right? And then it goes into the last sentence of this first depiction, and we want to pay attention to waxwork and skeleton. So it's this sort of really eerie imagery and these words with really negative connotations that right away Dickens uses to describe Miss Havisham. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the video adaptations, and we're going to try and figure out, based on some of the words that we've drawn out of this passage, which of those depictions most accurately captures Miss Havisham as a character.